Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. A Hunger for Healing, the 12 Steps as a Classic Model for Christian Spiritual Growth. That's the new title of a book by Austin writer Keith Miller, well known throughout the world. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today we're privileged to have Keith Miller back with us again, inspirational writer whose work extends far beyond the locality. He's recently co-authored Facing Codependence, top seller for Harper's Publishers. And last year we had Keith with us on the program as he had brought to the public Hope in the Fast Lane. Through his writing and lectures, Miller has become a leading interpreter of faith in the modern world. And Keith, we welcome you back.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
And as I had a chance to look through your book here, The 12 Steps as a Classic Model, I was thinking about what was put in, I believe, is the Newsweek edition of '89, October of '89. You quote that here, that there are something like 500,000 self-help groups in the country now modeled on the 12 steps, 15 million Americans. It's quadrupled in number over the last 10 years. I mean, it is a spiritual revolution, as you describe it. And what do you do in terms of interpreting the reason for that?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened is that the pain level that people have in their personal relationships has just risen enormously. The statistics are going up on everything from alcoholism to all kinds of drug addictions, teenage pregnancies, and people are trying to do something to feel better. And the things we've chosen as a society to do that: drinking, eating, sex, gambling, work, religious work even. These compulsions we have to overcome this pain are not working anymore. And the fact that people are having to say, my God, all these things that I've been given and my faith doesn't work when it comes to this level of relationships. And so suddenly the 12-step programs are saying, here, we've got a way to deal with these compulsions, and it's working.
I know you make the statement here that for many years, centuries even, there has been faith as a resource, but all of a sudden coming into view is a method, kind of a method in your gladness sort of thing. Yeah. And what is that
Well, this is the first spiritual model that is comprehensive, that covers a whole of life, and it's not just a model for praying or for doing specific things. This is a model for living a way of life in 400 years in the church. See, the other models were, at the time, the Benedictine rule, the Ignatius and his enormous group through the Society of Jesus of telling people how to do faith. These were Catholic and they were European. And this is a totally American phenomenon. And it is these people have taken, I say these people, we have taken, but I didn't form it, but have taken the biblical principles that the church has ejected because they're too painful. And out of this have created a thing of healing. It's the stone which the builders have rejected. The church no longer uses confession and rigorous honesty and amends and these things. And they've taken these things and woven them into an amazing thing that actually produces people who are weller than well.
You know, I was thinking too of the Oxford movement. Was a spiritual discipline that came up in England at you mentioned 400 years ago, but there have been some others that have come in the meantime.
Well, the Oxford group is a part of this movement. In other words, the Oxford group, AA, came out of the Oxford movement. And but the Oxford people said they had the four absolutes. And the drunks of Alcoholics Anonymous said, I won't say what they said, but they said, no way, baby, that, absolute is not what we're about. We can't do anything absolutely except drink. And so they said, we can't tolerate that. It's a perfectionist kind of thing. They wouldn't have used those terms, but it demanded perfection, And these people said, our problem is we can't be perfect. Alcoholics and addicts and people who have these compulsions are actually very sensitive people who are aware of their imperfections. That's why you need to drink to put out the pain.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the Oxford movement then served as a stimulus to the development of AA,
Yes.
but just with reverse English on it. I mean, it stimulated them to do just the opposite. You can't emphasize the absolutes.
Yeah. It was a worldwide movement and called moral rearmament that came out of that.
Right.
Well, but this was a thing that Paul Tournier and Sam Shoemaker and some people came out of it this way, said, no, this is not right somehow, because, but it used a lot of the principles that were very healing. But in demanding perfection, it had its own built-in sabotage.
And it emphasized a small group. It emphasizes the personal confession and the sense of sharing that marks the 12-step groups today.
Yes, but the thing that is, there are no demands in the sense the 12 steps are not rules. They're only suggestions.
Maybe we have a chance to take a look at the 12 steps. That there's a listing of these that I think originally came out of AA but have been applied to a variety of other, and you might just give us a little bit of a sense of how that lays out from start to finish.
Well, how do you mean how it lays out?
Well, I mean, you start out with the admission that you're powerless, and you wind up with helping others, and in between there's a pattern of some kind.
Well, the thing is that this is a phenomenon that religions have known about forever, but they've kind of forgotten. You know, that as long as you realize and think that you can do it, then you're putting yourself in a God position.
And so the second one becomes you come to believe that a power greater than yourself is necessary.
Yeah, and to restore us to sanity, there's a sense in which when you're living in a compulsion or an addiction, there's an insanity. It's an insane way to live. And so to face that is a real ego insult.
And to turn our lives over to the care of God is a natural step beyond that.
Well, it's not natural. Matter of fact, people fight it and get out of the program because they don't want to do it. But see, the Christian church, let's just stop with 1, 2, 3. A lot of 12-step people say the church does what they call the Christian waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You get people in touch with God, with their first powerlessness, then with the fact that God can do it, then you make a commitment. And then you have them go back and get 3 more. And when I came to my sponsor and I said, wait a minute, I'm a Christian, I don't have to do step 3. He said, you have a higher power? I said, yeah. He said, is it working for you? I said, sure. And he said, what are you doing in this program? I mean, the fact is that we have a delusion that it's working for us. And I said, then I finally said, okay, I'm going to go do it. So I made this, I came back and said, I've done it. And he said, you don't read very well for a guy with 3 degrees. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you can't do it. It doesn't say you do it. He said, you Christians think because you have said something, you've done it. And I said, we do, that's right. And he said, it doesn't say we committed our lives. You can't do that. That's grace. He said, it says that we made a decision to do it. He said, if you made a decision to buy a house, would you have the house? I said, no. He said, what would you have to do? He said, well, you have to find the house. You'd have to get a lawyer. You'd have to get an abstractor, get a realtor, you'd get a banker. You'd have to do a lot of things. He said, right. And then you'd have the house. I said, well, wait a minute. You're saying that you make a commitment to God and you don't have God? You're not well? He said, no. You make a commitment to God. You make a decision to do this. I said, well, then how do you get well? How do you commit your life to God? He said, that's what the other 9 steps are. See, we don't have anything to do that in the church.
Let's take a look at the next several of these.
Okay, searching and fearless moral inventory. Well, it's like transferring a business. And when you do that, you'd want to know what's in the business. And I said, I don't have to do that. The God I pray to already knows. He said, it's not for him, it's for you. He said, you don't know because of denial. As you list this stuff, it's like taking a thread out of your mouth. String tied to the thread, there's a rope tied to the string, there's a chain tied to the rope, the bucket of garbage comes up. You never get the garbage unless you pull the thread. He said it's a process. And as you follow this process, you begin to see what you've been sticking down in the basement underneath the denial in your life.
Yeah.
I was amazed as I did this process.
So it's for your own self-clarification rather than
because the
anyone else.
Primary symptom of this disease underlying the 12 steps is that we cannot see it in ourselves. It's denial. We can see it perfectly in other people.
So the 5th step of admitting to God and to ourselves
and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Well, I said, my gosh, I'm a Protestant. I have to do that. He said, you want to get well? I said, I'm not sure. because I'd made it. I was going to be the world's champion 12-stepper. I mean, I had a list that was, it's just an enormous thing. And now I was going to have to read it to another human being. I had everything from nose picking when I was a child. I mean, everything was in there. And so I said, you can't be serious. I got to read all this stuff, everything about sex, everything I'd ever done. And he said, right. I said, why? He said, because if you don't do it before another person, this disease will talk you out of the fact and you'll still feel guilty. You need a witness so that he said, you read that to another person, Miller, you'll never forget you did it.
Externalize it.
Yes, it's a sacrament.
Yeah, okay. And then the sixth step, this readiness.
Yeah, admitted to ourselves, we're entirely ready to have God remove it. And I said, well, of course, who wouldn't? I'm a Christian. He said, all of them? He said, how about some lust thoughts? How about some control issues? How about your work addiction? I said, well, if I gave up my work addiction, I might not get up at 6 in the morning. If I gave up lust, I might not have a sex life. If I gave up control, maybe nobody would like me if I didn't do all this stuff to fix them. And he said, right, you have to think this over. And I said, I'm not so sure. He said, well, when you get sure, you do it. Then step 7 says, humbly ask him to remove these shortcomings. And I said, wait a minute, I can do that easy. He said, no, it's very difficult because you're asking God, you're giving God permission to clean up your whole life, your entire life. And I said, that's the most terrifying thing I ever heard. And I said, I can't do it. He said, that's the point, Miller. This is a spiritual watershed. You don't do it. You've been trying to do it and failing all your life. I said, right. I said, well, then how do you do this if I became entirely ready? He said, well, he's a funny guy. He said, well, I imagine a conveyor belt's right here in my mind, right here beside me. Here comes a lust or resentment or something, and I take it and I don't even engage my mind. It'll always win if you engage your mind with it. He said, you take it, you put it in a sack, and you put it on this conveyor belt and send it up to God. And I said, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard, and I went home and tried it. And it works. You see, I do it, I sent the resentment up, and then 5 minutes later, plop, there it was. I looked in the sack, I said, what do you do? He said, put it right back. And I'd put it back, and sometimes, 12 times a week. And then one day, the difficulties of my life began to disappear. Things I had always tried to overcome by trying and praying, but because I was letting God and the power of God do this instead of me and my prayer and manipulations.
Yeah. So it came back, but then it didn't.
It came back, but see, we're looking for magic, we
Right.
Christians. And it's not magic, but what it is it's commitment. As you commit these things over and over again, and you don't even bring them back in and say, oh, I failed, what a terrible person, which is what we do.
Yeah.
I said, no, just recognize it, put it back on there, the discipline of turning it over to God, then it's God's power that finally, when you're ready to turn it loose, he'll take it.
Oh, yeah, okay. And then
Incredible process.
And this next step of listing persons that you've harmed and willing to make amends seems to flow out of that in terms
Well,
of...
the thing is that this is spiritual genius. Now, these crazy drunks went out. Everybody rejected them, including the church. And that's why they say, by the way, Christians get very upset about this because they don't say higher power. Because they say higher power instead of Jesus. They were Christians who started this, mostly. But they said, okay, we're going to say Jesus. They said, no way we're going to say Jesus. We know Jesus and his people. Because Jesus' people were the biggest judgmental people on alcoholics of anybody. They didn't understand about addiction. They thought it was a moral problem. And so what it was, and these people would try real hard and couldn't do it 3 times. They'd be drunk. And so they'd ask them to leave or else just isolate them. So they said, we're going to call it higher power. But let me tell you something that I've discovered that's incredible, is that when you get into this program, after a few weeks or months, you realize that the God they're talking about has the personality of Jesus Christ. There's only one God with that characteristics, model.
Begins to sound familiar.
It begins to sound familiar. And what happens to these people, after 3 or 4 years, they begin to sound and look like Jesus. Now, in the average church, when somebody comes in, 3 or 4 years, they sound and look like a lawyer and an insurance man. Now, who are you going to go with? I mean, these people get up in the middle of the night to help people. Yeah. They don't ask who you are or what you have, and they give themselves.
And this the step to make amends, it seems to me, is one of the things that has been in the tradition for all these centuries, but not practiced.
It was a part of the early church's movement. It was the exemolegesis was the confession in the first meetings, and then they made amends and did what they could, and then they turned it over to God. Then the third thing was koinonia, or fellowship, we call it. And we try to have the fellowship without having the things that brought the freedom to have the fellowship. And they've picked that up and gone back, and you make amends because you don't understand what you're doing to people until you take a look.
Okay. And this ninth step is and also having to do with amends. What's the difference between the eighth and the ninth?
The eighth is to make a list. You're starting with your four-step list. Then you make a list, and the ninth is to actually go, or if you
And do
can't
it.
find them, yeah. And I said, the one I had the worst thing with, I couldn't find a businessman I'd done a bad deal on. And I said to my sponsor, I can't find him. He said, write him a letter. I said, do you understand? I can't find his address. He said, write him a letter. He said, well, what am I going to do with it? He said, well, you're going to take it down, put his first name on it, put it in the post office, and don't put it in a return address. He said, it'll give him some interesting reading, and said, then you will have done all you can do to clean up your side of the street. This is not a deal to make friends with people you've hurt. It is to clear this from your life.
Yeah. Wonder if the person's dead.
Well, if a person's dead, you may have to if it's directly about him, you may have to tell your sponsor and make amends to the person spiritually.
I see.
But use your sponsor so that you have done it out loud before another human being.
You know, I recently had occasion to visit with those who are in Debtors Anonymous, who pattern their program exactly after these steps. And they said, we're the one self-help group where the addiction can be paid off to the penny. Whether it's to friends that you've bummed money off of or to American Express, there's no question about what making restitution means for them. And even though these other addictions don't necessarily have that exactitude to it, nevertheless, the person who's making the amends knows what it means to be acting with integrity in that regard.
Oh, yeah, and if you don't, you see, you have a sponsor. Sponsors are a biblical thing we've given up altogether. You know, Paul had these young Silas and Aristarchus and Mark, you know, and Barnabas had Mark, and they had young people they traveled with, and they helped them in the program of Christianity. And so they picked this up. We've given it up. But everyone in the 12-step program has a sponsor. Since I can't see my own slick ways, I would rationalize, I don't have to tell that man I have to make amends. I read my amends list to my sponsor, and he says, yeah. And, you know, he helps you see, and you tell him what you're going to say so that you will also not abuse the person while you're making amends. And say to my wife, well, I really want to tell you, I'm sorry I hurt you, but what you did to me, I should have done twice as much. I mean, that's our way of making amends. And he would say, look, are you taking their inventory or yours?
Yeah. I'd like to take a look at the rest of the steps here, the 10th, 11th, and 12th. This personal inventory and the meditation and prayer, and then the 12th step in terms of sharing this with others. Do those hang together in a certain way?
Yeah, actually the steps are in four movements, really. It's a spiritual movement of four parts, but the last part, the steps are actually the first 9. It's like a set of spiritual golf clubs. I mean, these old timers will look at a problem. They'll pulling out an iron. They'll pull out a 4. That's about a 4, they'll say. And they'll pull out a 4 iron, and they'll sit down, and they'll do a 4-step. And these are principles you use on all your life. And you carry this bag of steps around, and you use them I use the steps every day.
So this is a make amends shot.
This is a 9-shot. You know, and you realize, what you begin to realize is how your relationships are fouled up and what it is that makes them fouled up so that you can know at which point to go. And it's amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
But what about these last 3? You say the first 9 hang together.
The first 9 are the hang together, and they're the ones that are the program itself. The last 9 are the maintenance steps and the moving out from your own life into helping other people. Because the 12 steps say...
The last 3, you mean?
The last 3, but the last one is actually that. But the last 3 steps are 10, 11, and 12. 10 is taking daily inventory instead of a step 4. Every day you stop and think, at which points have I hurt people in my life?
All right.
And then and when you do that, you make amends the next day. So you don't get these things we've stuffed down here, they make us sick. They give us bad dreams. They're terrible garbage that we have, and we can't see them. All right. So as we get them out, then the basement's clean. We don't have a basement full of dead dogs anymore. But the fact is, we don't want another one. You know, Jesus talked about getting a demon out of somebody, and 7 came.
7 came back.
Okay, so what happens is that when you do that, every day you begin to give these things back. So you get in the habit of making amends, the habit of cleaning your relationships up every day, so you don't get another sickness.
Okay, what about the 11th?
11th is the first so-called spiritual step. You know, through prayer and meditation. Now, if we'd have been done it as Christians, first place we'd have had 156 steps because we wouldn't want to turn anybody's step down.
Mm-hmm.
See, these are just the ones that really work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So they kept them. The 11th step, they knew if you did the spiritual step first, you'd never get to the hard stuff. You just sit around and pray all day, do prayer groups, Bible studies. But what they said is, no, you get your life cleaned up, then you can listen to God because you don't have all this garbage, all this rationalization, these denial things. So then you listen to God, which is what meditation is for the 12-stepper, and then you learn to pray.
And even if prayer doesn't mean anything to you, anybody can meditate.
Anybody can meditate, but let me tell you what prayer means to me. I used to pray, God, help my daughter not to marry this guy or not to do that or not to get this job, and then sure enough sometimes they married him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, finest people I ever knew. But see, I was running their lives through God. I was praying for what God ought to do to them because he needed the information. I mean, evidently, because I prayed those kind of prayers. And now do you know what I do? I just put each child in my hand like this. I hold him up to God, and I put him in his hands, and I don't say anything.
So prayer is an exercise of release.
Prayer is offering people to God so that his power can change them, because you learn in this program you cannot change your own life. And addicts know that who are in the program. People outside don't, and they keep trying and trying and trying compulsively.
And until you take that 12th step to go share this with someone else is incomplete.
Well, yes, but it says, the 12th step says, having had a spiritual awakening. Step 12, you have a spiritual awakening. Now, spirituality does not mean religion in the program. It means the extent to which one is in touch with reality. Ultimate reality, God, my own reality, and your reality. A spiritual person is in touch with his or her own life and feelings and thoughts. And so he or she can live with integrity, with God and with people. And that's what spirituality is in the 12 steps.
Okay.
And then you must give it away, they tell you, or you'll lose it.
Now
You cannot keep this program.
You can be an atheist and follow the 12 steps.
It's really hard, but you sure can. See, because they bring you in, and people start out taking a doorknob. They say, we don't care, just take, because they know something that we don't know. They know that if you take a doorknob as your higher power, we think that's ridiculous, but the thing is, it means that you shift the focus of your life out here. Once you do that, a process which is called faith begins.
Yeah.
You turn loose, even if it's to a doorknob. 3 steps in, they start saying God and say it from then on.
Well, you know, one of the things that I wanted to share before our program was done today was last time we talked, we had occasion to refer to Sinners Anonymous, which you refer to in this book on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share the address because people call in afterwards and ask about that, and this is the way people can find out more about that. But Keith, I've been waiting to have you back because after we talked about it, I thought, if I ever get a crack at this guy again, I'm going to let you know that the problem I have with the whole concept of Sinners Anonymous, because Alcoholics Anonymous is the first in this series of self-help groups, came out with the point, you need to recognize that alcoholism is a disease and not a sin. So that the extent to which you have an organization that is predicated upon sin, it seems on the face of it to undo the understanding that addictions are diseases and not to be morally reprehensible, judged in that way.
Yeah, it's a matter of terminology, because what I believe is that sin with a capital S is putting myself in the center where only God should be. So William Temple said this, I didn't come up with it. And when I do this, I'm set up to commit sins, which are the moral things I do in order to get my own way and my own happiness. I steal, rape, have all this stuff going on to get what I want when I want it. And those are sins. Those are moral things that I do because of this other thing, which is not a moral thing.
All right, but would you then say, in effect, to those in AA, well, look, reevaluate what you've been saying, that it's not just...
We in AA don't talk like that. You don't say to somebody, reevaluate. I mean, for me, sin means this. Now, alcoholics are not sinners in the sense of, because they're not necessarily trying to control God. What they're trying to do is get sober. But you see, Christians, we are the ones who are trying to control people. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous say they are too. They say our problem was not alcohol, the big book says. Our problem was not alcohol, it was control. We were trying to be the producer and director of the show, which is God, when we were only actors. And the other actors got kind of ticked. So we did it with a nice way. And then they really got ticked. So we drank at them. That's alcoholism. But see, Christianity, we are people who put ourselves in the center where only God should be. Then we try to control our families. We do it passive-aggressively or with a macho swing.
Well, the other problem that presents itself to me in thinking of a Sinners Anonymous group is that in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any of these other addictions, you know, when you quit, it's clear you're not taking the stuff anymore. But in regard to Sinners Anonymous, you're never over it. You never quit.
Well, the thing is, you know when you're in Sinners Anonymous that you're a controller, that you're trying to control your children. Maybe they don't want to come home anymore. Maybe you're trying to control your wife or your husband or the person you're with. And this control of other people is what sin is about. They're not our people my children are not my children. I don't own them. But when I act like that, they run away.
So it's not so much a matter of quitting that forever because you're into control continually, but you're just more aware of it and you begin to...
As you work these steps, what you do is you don't control in the same way. Or when you do, you go and make amends. We had something over the telephone. I did something that was controlling to you, and I called you back and made amends. That's what you learn to do in the program. Then I forgot about till right now. You have a process for handling control so that you face it, and then I'm much less controlling. I'm still so full of myself. So you find out you're almost totally self-centered.
Right. Well, I think that you have given us a sense of what this revolution is about in the broadest sense and closer to home. And I wish we'd had time to maybe talk a little bit more about what this means specifically in Austin, because I think we have our unique set of problems here, and maybe we can come back to that at some time. But in the meantime, for the people that are watching this show today, for Austin Metropolitan Ministries, I want to thank you for being with us again.
Thanks, Richard. I enjoyed it.
You're a real blessing to us.
Thank you.
I'd like to say to you folks who've been watching, we're glad to have your company and hope that you'll be with us next week on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson. Thank you for being with us, and peace be with you.